Look, see there, I tried to tell you not to test my rage, cause you just a yellow belt and I'm a just Sky stage. You know the deadly martial arts of the black and the white lotus. Someday I'ma be the POTUS, you'll still be a giant scrotum.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from the place with the decks as usual. We have another budget deck today, another one that'll just cost you, actually this time a little under $20, not bad at all. This is Mono Blue Tempo, or as we used to call it back in the day, Mono Blue Fish. Well, a little info on the deck before we move on, because a lot of people might be unfamiliar with the term tempo. Basically, it's a deck with a bunch of creatures very, very low on the curve that try to do a small amount of damage, but, a lot at a time. The deck goes pretty wide, and it has some sort of control elements to it. A counterspell here, a bounce spell there, and the whole idea, basically, is to ruin the opponent's tempo, That's how we can win with small creatures, by sort of keeping anything large off the board and negating, their first, second, and third turn plays, obviously. So that's how the deck usually runs, and it runs pretty well in its current form. So let's check it out. 14 one-drop creatures in this deck. I'm going to tell you about 3 different ones right now, and then I'm going to, just kind of gloss over the other one. We've got a playset of Fairy Miscreants, playset of Salvage Drone, and a playset of Godol Lurker. Godol Lurker, great, obviously, can be a 2/2 if you do it right, but oftentimes you just play it on the first turn, you're smashing through the damage every turn. Fairy Miscreants and Salvage Drone obviously can draw you cards, another often present element in a tempo deck like this. You want to outdraw them too, and these cards both help us with that, and Fairy Miscreant has a little bit of evasion while she's at it. So perfect creature for the deck, and Salvage Drone is just sort of another one-drop, and this one helps with card selection. That's exactly what the deck wants. The other one-drop we're playing is 2 copies of Sidisi's Faithful. This does a couple of things. Good tempo play, Bounce is one of their guys, no matter what stage of the game we're in. Not bad on the first turn if we're on the draw, or even the second turn, Really good early game and even good in the later stages. And we don't have to just exploit Sidisi's Faithful herself. We can exploit Salvage Drone and get the draw off of it. Any creature that is now defunct, we can sacrifice to the Faithful's exploit and keep the Faithful out to block if that's what we need to do. So it's fairly versatile and always a good tempo play no matter what. Here's our gang of 2-drops, and it's all the money in the deck. 4 copies of Stratis Dancer and 4 copies of Harbinger of the Tides. Both cards about $1.50 on TCG Player right now, so the 2 play sets of these cards are what's going to cost us the most money. But they're both very, very important for the deck. Stratis Dancer, you can morph her and flip her up in time to deal with a Languish or, any 5 mana mass removal, whether you're on the play or the draw. So that's really, really good, which is mostly what she's going to do. We're very, very vulnerable to mass removal, and we need to be more resilient, so that really helps out with that. And obviously the Harbinger of the Tides is just another amazing tempo play, Blue has a lot of really cool tempo plays, just mono blue right now, and Harbinger's at the top of that list, Not only can he come down on the second turn for you, but he can come down, later on in the game with Flash and just really wreck up combat on their turn, Or at the end of their turn, you can play it and bounce a guy. You'll be ready to attack on your turn, which is what tempo decks really want to do. So a lot of good things about Harbinger. I really don't see any reason not to play him. He is the absolute perfect fit for the deck. And to finish off the creatures, just 2 copies of Halimar Tidecaller. You haven't seen any of them yet, but we're playing an awful lot of cards with Awaken here. So we got to play Halimar Tidecaller. I think it's a really, really good 3-drop for us, Being able to, on some turns, play Tidecaller and then immediately play the card that you got back with it, Halimar Tidecaller, 2-power body, that's not great, nothing to write home about, but it is a body, and one of the bigger bodies in the deck, which is kind of sad, but true, Metallica. 15 spells in the deck. Here's some of those Awaken cards right here. 8 copies of 1-drops with Awaken, We've got 4 copies of Clutch of Currents and 4 copies of Rush of Ice, Both insanely important to the deck. I love Clutch of Currents. It's so good whether you're playing it first turn or 5th turn. This could be your 5-drop, Get rid of the biggest threat on the board for a turn or 2 and, get your own Awaken land out of the deal. It's not bad at all. But on the first couple of turns, this is especially good, First turn, 1-drop. Second turn, just another 1-drop. And then, basically bounce their 1-drop if that's what they're doing. Or if we're on the draw, we can bounce their 2-drop in that same sequence. So just Clutch of Currents is fantastic. And Rush of Ice does the same thing, Taps the guy down for a whole combat step, allowing 2 whole combat steps, really, and allowing us to get through twice, Often, always the best creature on the board will get tapped down by this for 2 of our whole turns. So it's just, that's insane. Card is really good, and when you can Awaken off of it, that's awesome too. 3 copies of Send to Sleep in the deck. Obviously, I've just already told you about 8 spells already. They all cost 1 mana apiece. All sorceries. So it works really well with Send to Sleep. And there are a lot of turns where you can like Rush of Ice and then Send to Sleep for the Spellmaster, And it's just like insane being able to tap down 3 dudes, their best dudes. And oftentimes, a lot of decks don't have more than a few dudes out, So just being able to swing through with all of our dudes, usually 4 or 5 dudes at a time for a couple of turns can often end the game. Like, Send to Sleep is just insane in this and goes really well with Rush of Ice and Clutch of Currents for that matter. Just fantastic, fantastic card for the deck. Some counter spells. 1 copy of Disdainful Stroke, 1 copy of Negate, and 1 copy of Scatter to the Winds. Covers this pretty well. Scatter to the Winds, obviously, we can get this back with Halimar Tidecaller. It's a really good way to, after we've dropped our 1 and 2 drops, sort of cover us for, a turn or 2 if we've got it in our opening hand. We can counter Siege Rhino and stuff like that, Master Removal with this. Same thing goes with Negate, we can counter Master Removal. Same thing goes with Disdainful Stroke, we can counter Master Removal and the Rhino in that case. So, and the Rhino really sucks. It really hurts us. We don't want to have to Clutch of Currents it because we don't want to have to, we don't want to bounce it, period. So, Rush of Ice works fine on it, but we don't want it to hit the board in the first place. So we have some counter spells to deal with that. And 1 copy of Treasure Cruise, which I'd like to up to 2 maybe, or even just play Anticipate in the deck. I can see that too. But Treasure Cruise very often will play for just the 1 mana in the mid-game, really when you want to refill your hand too. You're going to have a couple of guys in the graveyard, you're going to have a couple of, 1 and 2 mana spells in your graveyard by that point. So Treasure Cruise can often play for just 1 or 2 mana and is a really good refill. I've liked the way it's played so far. 21 lands in the deck. We've got 17 islands and 4 Skyline Cascade. I really want to play this card. Sometimes can just be a 3-drop and lock a guy down for a turn. That's not bad at all either. Really like the card actually. And here's our board. We're sort of boarding out into control, sort of. Just mostly filled with control elements in the sideboard here because we've got to have what little removal we can have. Encase in Ice is especially good. Have to play Encase in Ice and actually considered it for the main deck because it just takes care of everything we're actually worried about, and the flash is really nice on it, obviously. So, and Encase in Ice is a candidate for the main deck, and I'm actually considering also Singing Bell Strike for the main deck. I can see that being a thing too, just 1 or 2 copies, but both cards have performed very well. And here are your power rankings. A final score of 56, which is not bad at all for a deck like this, Plays tempo pretty admirably, We've got some card draw stuff and Miscreant, Salvage Drone, Treasure Cruise, We could add Anticipate, maybe a 1-of, I could see that. We've got some bounce elements, Harbinger of the Tides. We've got Clutch of Currents, and then a lot of things that tap their dudes down and freeze them for a turn, too, We've got Rush of Ice, and we've got Skyline Cascade and Send to Sleep, and our counter elements are very good in the later game. I feel like since there's not like amazing removal in blue, why not just join them? If you can't beat them, join them. Play what little removal elements we can play and just focus around getting as much small damage in as quickly as possible and sort of negating their plays. Even if they're able to play big creatures, we can just tap them down, send them back to the hand, whatever we need to do to just get that little bit of damage in and finish out the game. And it works more often than you might think. A bunch of 1/1s, as long as there's 4 or 5 of them, a 2-power guy and 3 1-power guys is 5 damage a turn when you're tapping down other guys. And that's a really swift clock. So the deck has performed much better than I ever thought it would. Well, that's the deck. That's all of it. That's all I got. Super quick deck this time around. Lots of 4-ofs. That lends to the consistency figure. You saw that there. And it's a monocolored deck, so super consistent. Does exactly what it's supposed to do, like 98% of the time, So, in any case, next time. Next time, what I'm almost certainly going to do is black-white control. I saw a lot of interest in that, even more so than I thought there might be. So I'm almost certainly going to do it. The deck has performed awesomely so far. But let me know what else you want to see. Lucky Charms is coming up. Obviously, the mono blue $20 control is coming up. But I've got a bunch of other stuff up my sleeve too. So stay tuned. Like, share, comment, subscribe if you liked all the content. That would be awesome if you did any of those things. Or all of them would be very sweet too. And I will see you guys next time. I'm Deb from MTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.